Welcome back. We are here with another Four-Wheel Friday. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar, we've done one other live stream like this that we ran just a couple weeks back, and that was with me and Bill talking about Stage 3's history. So if you do want to check that out, obviously that's still on our YouTube page, and you can take a look. But this week, we've got another topic for you, and we're going to be looking into our Raptor and basically giving you a build update on this thing. So a lot of you have been following the build as we put it together and done some shop days, and we added suspension, wheels, tires, all that good stuff, everything to make it look the way it is. But one thing that you guys haven't seen a lot of yet is the sort of new Overland setup that we did on the bed. So we're going to kind of run through the details on that. But first, I also want to say that we are going to keep pushing with these live streams, and we will have another one coming up with Bill back here with me, and we're going to be taking a look at some suspension comparisons, mostly for F-150, talking in terms of leveling kits, coilovers, lifts, what's good, what's bad, what we like, or what we prefer, and kind of give you guys an idea of how all of these kits stack up, because we always get questions from you asking, how's the Fox versus Icon, or how's King versus, Fox, or, Rancho versus this or that. There's 1,000 different ways to compare them, so we're going to hopefully clear up a lot of those questions for you. But anyways, that'll be next episode of Four Wheel Friday. So today, like I said, we're going to focus in on the Raptor. Now, obviously, right off the bat, the big thing that changed is we've got a tent on here. And so essentially how we set this up is we removed the tonneau cover, put on an RCI bed rack, and then did this Smitty-built Overlander tent on top of that bed rack. And this rack is actually the same one that I've been running on my F-150 Tremor Overland build, which a lot of you guys have seen. And we just really like that rack. It's a good setup. As you can see, it's really low profile, which is nice, so it kind of keeps the tent sitting down closer to the roof line, and that was one of the reasons I really liked it, but it works out well on this build too, especially because the Smitty-built tent's a little taller when it's closed, so having it up above the Raptor's roof line isn't ideal. So, like I said, we've got the RCI rack on there. Went ahead and mounted that down. It's just a clamp install, so you can actually drill holes into the bed kind of rail. There's sort of a lip there where you could put holes through to run hardware. And maybe if we want to get a little bit more permanent with it down the road, we'll do something along those lines. But I know in my experience with this rack, the clamps have held on just fine, even with all the off-road use and hitting trails and camping with it and shaking it around, it hasn't really had trouble. And if you check them every couple months and tighten them down, you're probably not going to have to sweat it. So we stuck with the clamps on this and it mounted up just fine. Now with that, Smitty-built tent is pretty universal, like most rooftop tents are. So the brackets can kind of be slid around and adjusted. You can position the tent either off the driver or passenger side, or even right off the back if you want. And so we kind of sat down, looked it over. A lot of people tend to position it off the driver or passenger. We figured driver would work well for this, and we didn't really have to do any modifications or anything to get it to work with the RCI rack. It bolted up pretty easily. It just slid the hardware on. It's got some metal plates that go underneath. Those basically lock up against the bottom of the rack, and that just kind of holds the tent in place. So far, that's been an excellent setup. It wasn't hard to get it put together. It was pretty easy to just fit everything, and obviously the tent is the right kind of size for a 5.5-foot bed. And it really is basically like a two-person tent. I forget exactly how Smitty-built advertises this. A lot of times with these rooftop tent manufacturers, they'll push and say 2 to 3 or 3 to 4 on tents that are maybe not quite that spacious. So this is easily a 2-adult kind of tent, and then you could maybe squeeze a child in there with you if you needed. But it's a good fit for this truck. Obviously with it unfolding, you get a lot of head and leg room, so it's plenty big enough for somebody who's 6 foot tall or even 6.5 feet tall to lay down there and be fully extended, which is great. Now, as far as that hanging on, obviously on a Raptor, this is a vehicle that's built for off-road use, and so like I said, the rack tends to hang on pretty well, and we haven't had any issues there. The tent also has been really sturdy on this. We haven't done a lot of trips yet. This is a really new setup, and so Bill actually took this out just about a week or two ago and camped with it for a while, and he was super happy with the setup. He wheeled around in the woods, got to do a little high-speed stuff in the dirt, and there wasn't any issues there. Didn't have anything rattle off or loosen up or break, so definitely positive in that direction. And I expect that as we continue to use the truck, we won't have to sweat it a whole lot. We'll probably check it every couple months and just make sure everything's tightened up, or maybe after every big trip. But really, it's not an issue where we're worried about this thing flying off or having problems. So with that being said, I already gave you some details on that tent, but as you can see, this is a little different from some of the Free Spirit tents that we've been showing, either just on our website or the one that I have on my truck is the M60. Now, this folds out, so it's not just a straight pop-up with one solid platform. It does clamshell, and that's how you get it to fold onto the vehicle. And I'd say, Free Spirit makes both versions where you can either clamshell it like this or have a pop-up like mine. Both are pretty good. It really depends on the application. Obviously, this clamshell style works really well for the Raptor, and we are confined to the amount of space we have on the bed. But I think Smittybilt did a good job with it. I will say that in my experience between this and an FSR tent, I think the FSR is a little bit higher quality, and the biggest thing I noticed is it's easier and quicker to set up. So the Smittybilt does fold out pretty quick, and I mean you can get this thing undone and going in a matter of 10 minutes or so, but you do have to take the time to pull the cover off, unfold the tent, undo the little latches on the inside, everything that's kind of holding it together, and then you're going to need to go ahead and obviously put up all your prop rods for the rain fly and the little deflectors over the windows, and so that stuff just takes time of you crawling up and down and around the vehicle as you're setting it up, which can be maybe a drawback for some people. I think it's nice to have, and obviously you want to have those up, but the convenient thing with the FSR tents is a lot of that pulls out automatically, so you don't have to have extra poles to put up, and you don't have to manually extend a lot of things in the tent. It kind of just unfolds as you pull it out. So that same kind of thinking applies to when you put it away too. I've found that this tent takes a lot longer to put away than an FSR tent typically does. Now, with those things being said, the big difference that you'll see between a tent like this and an FSR or even a CVT or an ARB or a lot of those other really big brand name tents is the Smittybilt is exceptionally cheap. This is a much more affordable tent than most of the ones on the market, and I think that's one of the biggest selling points. So the value there is pretty good. Overall, the tent's a solid quality tent. It's still comfortable to sleep in. You get everything you need to mount it outside of an actual rack, and so I think for a lot of people, this is a really approachable setup, but if you are somebody that uses rooftop tents a lot or is camping all the time and you want that additional quality or you need a faster setup and teardown time, you will probably find more value in something like an FSR. And I know for me personally, I would probably still choose the Free Spirit tent every time over the Smittybilt just because I like the comfort and I like the build quality and I like that it is as quick as possible to set up and tear down. But something like this could be a really good entry-level point for those of you guys who are maybe considering a rooftop tent but don't want to commit to something that's a little out of your price range. So I think that kind of wraps my thoughts overall on the Smittybilt. I mean, like I said, this is still an excellent tent. The color's nice too. The all tan looks really good on the Raptor. I'm a big fan of just how this all blends, and with the black rack and everything, it almost looks like it's meant to be, or that this could be factory Overland package. It really does fit nice. And then it's got actually just a plain black weatherproof cover that goes over it when it's closed, which is nice and subtle. I mean, you still obviously kind of have that brick on top of your rack, but it looks good when it's closed up and it seals in tight. And I guess that's actually another interesting thing to mention is most tent manufacturers have some sort of proprietary way or some sort of strap that they use or strap system to hold the covers on over the tents and lock them down. And Smittybilt's about the only one I've seen that uses Velcro with their straps. And I wasn't sure how that was going to pan out, but it actually does cinch up pretty tight, and then the Velcro kind of seals around this outer edge once it's closed up, and it seems to do a pretty good job of locking the dust out. I haven't had a lot of issues with the FSR tents that I've ran getting dust up in there as we drive. They tend to seal pretty tight with just their clamp and strap systems that they do. But the Velcro works actually really well on the Smittybilt, and it's nice because it does seem to still seal a little bit tighter. And I mean, you can see how clean the tent is still just sitting here. I mean, after a couple days in the woods, it looks brand new. And I think that is something nice to have, because obviously a tent's meant to be outdoors and it's meant to be used, and it doesn't really matter too much if you get some dirt on it, but you really don't want dirt and bugs and things getting inside of the tent or making it uncomfortable to sleep in at night or just hard to clean in general. So that is definitely a big plus. Now with this, there is actually another thing that we added to the Overland build that I didn't mention, and it's a little hard to see here, but you can actually see it in some of the photos we have of this truck on the website. And speaking of that, there is a link that you guys can check out in the description that will take you to the build page on this truck, and we have some updated information about this whole setup if you're wanting to take a look at some other images or get some ideas on prices and just the general way that these things flow. But that aside, one of the other things we did, which is on the opposite side of the truck, is some Roto Packs. And that's a pretty trendy Instagram overlander thing to do. What?
Well, you can walk over and get it.
And bring it over is what you're thinking? Okay, yeah. Well, I guess we can remove them is what Nick's saying. So yeah, here. I will show you guys exactly what we're talking about. Okay, so some of you guys are probably already familiar with this. This is the Rhodope Axe. This is one of their 2.5 gallon, or excuse me, 2 gallon kind of smaller containers. And we basically set 2 of these up on the bed rack on the side. And now what makes this basically different than a jerry can is the way that they mount. So it's got this big kind of slash cut in the center, and that's designed to work with a special sort of rotational mount that they have that you can mount wherever. I mean, we attach it to our rack, but people put them on roof racks as well, or I've seen people work them into body work with reinforcement from behind, and that essentially just gives you a nice solid way to mount the fuel, and it's a little bit more low profile than your regular jerry can. Now, I will say, I personally still use a regular 5-gallon jerry can, and I think that there's still a lot of market for something like that. But if you need a creative way to mount your fuel, or you need something that's more low profile or something a little bit more sturdy, the mounting system for the Rhodope Axe is excellent, and it's worked really well on the rack for this truck. So I definitely see some of the value there. And with it being on the side of the truck, that low profile design is huge. We don't have a big block hanging off the edge, and we don't also have to like get a bumper with a mount for a jerry can if, you know, our bed's filled up with camping gear or whatever the situation might be. So it does add some versatility there. And then obviously it's kind of a cool look anyways. It definitely gives the Expedition feel to this truck, and the red is a real nice pop. So we're pretty happy with that kit overall. We'll try to use them a little bit more down the road as we have them mounted up. But between both of those, we've got, you know, 4 gallons of extra fuel that might get us out of a pinch with this truck, or it's additional fuel that you can use if somebody else is out, or you have buddies in your group that you're traveling with that may need a little extra gas. So there definitely is some viability to having a system like this on the vehicle. With that being said, Rhodope Axe does some different versions too of these cans. Obviously we went for the 2-gallon versions, but they do make larger 4-gallon combined versions where it's just one longer flat can. They also have ones for water, which I think would be cool actually for this build to get 1 water and 1 fuel, or mix it up, or maybe add some different sizes in there just so we get some better versatility for camping, because sometimes fuel isn't the only liquid you need. In fact, always water is a good thing to bring, and especially with this being a desert going truck, it's an excellent idea. So we'll see how that kind of pans out as we continue to work and move through the vehicle, but these are a handy little thing to have around, and I do like the design overall. Go ahead and move that off to the side. Now, one of the things that I have been asked, and some of the guys have mentioned around here with this truck, is kind of my thoughts on how this compares as like an overall build to my Overland build, because obviously these vehicles kind of have a similar purpose, but they're not necessarily similar trucks in a sense. Now, those of you that are unfamiliar, my vehicle is a 2014 F-150 Tremor package, which means it's a little shorty F-150 with the EcoBoost engine in it. It's 4-wheel drive, it's got the electronic rear locker in it, and we set that up with the Free Spirit tent, some Icon suspension, the 2.5 coilovers in the front, 34-inch tires. Really good, well-rounded build, and it's designed to kind of be get out there, get on some trails, find a good place to camp type of camping setup. And I wanted a short truck because I like that wheelbase. It fits a lot better than a lot of these larger F-150s do on narrow trails and tight areas where you have to work around corners. So it's a pretty big advantage, and the Tremor package is a really neat package for the single cabs because it does allow you to run that EcoBoost motor in there, and you can get it in 4-wheel drive, obviously. So that's how my truck's set up. Now, the Raptor obviously is a 6.2 V8. This is kind of a bad, fast desert off-roader. It's a lot wider, a lot longer than my truck is, but it's also fully loaded. It's a super luxurious vehicle, and the tent setup on here is a little bit different than what I have. So while it is designed for camping, I'd say that this thing's kind of a different style in how it approaches off-road. And really, I like both trucks. It would be hard to say that one's better than the other. It kind of comes down to how you use them. And so for me, my vehicle isn't really designed for a lot of all-out, high-speed, blasting through the desert kind of Baja racing off-road. It's designed for tight, narrow trails and getting through trees. And so it does that really well, whereas the Raptor would beat it out in the desert. But I'd also argue that the Raptor's not going to be able to fit a lot of the places that my truck would. So for somebody that's looking to camp in remote areas or get off into those tighter backwoodsy trails, the Tremor's probably going to be a more ideal kind of build. And we've already kind of ran into issues with this before off-road, that even regular off-road trails around here, the bushes start to overgrow pretty quick and you're dragging limbs and branches along it and scratching up the paint, and it's just a wide vehicle. But if you're not really looking to get into those tight trails and you just want to cruise through some open desert washes, hit the sand, or get out on some forest roads and find a decent camping spot, this can do that with all the comfort in the world, and obviously very quickly if you want. So it definitely makes for a really fun truck to drive, and this is probably one of my favorite builds that we've ever done, especially as far as just driving feel is concerned, because it's so smooth and so comfortable off-road, and you really can just haul ass with this thing and have a good time. So that's hard to beat. With that being said, as far as the tent setups in the back are concerned, it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier, that I usually prefer the Free Spirit style just because it's a quicker setup and quicker teardown, and I feel a little bit more comfortable in their tents. But something like this will still accommodate 2 people plenty comfortably, and you do still have your bed space underneath to load everything in. The advantage, I'd say, in my truck is that we do have a deck system in there as well with the pull-out drawers, so I can kind of run all my tools and all my camping gear in those drawers and then strap anything additional on top of the deck, which makes for a really efficient cargo management, and I do really like that system a lot. In the Raptor right now, we don't have any sort of drawer system, so it does rely on us just throwing tubs or bags or whatever in the back to store everything, and then it isn't necessarily locked up unless we make a specific effort to lock it up or put things in the cab. So it is 2 different styles of builds. I think in a lot of ways you can have a lot of fun with the Raptor that you maybe couldn't have with the Tremor, but I also think that the Tremor will probably get you places that you couldn't necessarily make in this vehicle. So that's my stance on it. It's a little bit on the fence. I still really like my truck, and I think in most cases if I had to pick to go camping, I would still pick my truck every time, but that's not to say that this thing isn't a blast. Now with that, as I mentioned, the advantage to the Tremor is the trail size and getting it off-road in tight areas. And so people have asked about taking a vehicle like this on tighter trails, either up in Sedona, stuff like the Broken Arrow Trail that we did with the Ranger, or even trails like Crown King, which is another popular one that kind of is in the Phoenix area and takes you up into the mountains from Lake Pleasant up north. And so there's some really advanced trails out there that are a little bit more Jeep biased, so to speak. And I think some of those could probably be done in this truck, and I don't really so much worry about traction or lift or off-road capability. I think it's got all that. Once again, it more comes down to size. So on some of these, like Crown King, for instance, you're working with a really narrow trail where even the Tremor is going to be a tight fit, and you're probably going to be acquiring some body damage or at least some scrapes and scuffs as you go, which for the right kind of person, depending how you want to use your vehicle, is fine. I know some people get upset because I tend to scratch and ding the Tremor a little bit as I've gotten it off-road, but it's a vehicle that I intend to use, so I make those sacrifices to take it cool places and enjoy it on the trails I want to hit. With a Raptor, a lot of people have a bigger investment into the vehicle. This is a more expensive truck. It obviously has some more expensive body work with these flared fenders, and it's a little bit wider. And so cramming it into places like that can either get you stuck, or you could end up with a lot more severe body damage, which I think isn't ideal. Bumps and bruises are all right, but actually breaking and cracking plastic and fiberglass and denting metal isn't really ideal, and a lot of people don't want to deal with the repairs on that either. So this does have its limitations on hitting some of the more advanced technical trails, but like I said, that's not really the intent for a build like this. It's designed to hit the desert and do it fast, and that it does really, really well. We've been super impressed with how quick it can get across sandy washes and some of the wider roads around Lake Pleasant, or even when we were up in Williams for our last kind of big off-road trip where we brought a few of the trucks up there. This thing can really just cruise, and we were able to swing it around on the property, kick up mud. The power is awesome. The 6.2 is just a super fun motor in my opinion, even if it's not the most efficient engine that Ford has ever offered. It's a good fit for the Raptor, and it kind of fits the over-the-top ridiculous nature of this truck in general. So kind of moving back into talking about the Raptor and where this build is progressing. Obviously, we've added some of this Overland stuff, and we're going to work on maybe getting some reviews and things like that out for you guys, where we talk a little bit more specifically about each of these parts and kind of give an official review video to these different products we've added. But with that being said, there is still a few other little things we want to continue to change and upgrade on this build. But one of the bigger parts we're moving towards is probably putting on some Icon suspension. And as you guys know, we have the Fox 3.0 kit on here, which has been excellent, and there is actually a review and an install video that's live on that if you guys want to check that out. It was a really awesome suspension kit. I've been super pleased with it, and we're not replacing it because we think it's bad or because anything broke, but more so because we want to try out the Icon suspension and get a feel for how these two kits compare and just see how it stacks up, basically. So I will say that off the bat, Icon's going to have a tough fight. I think the Fox kit is really excellent on this, and so if the Icon performs the same, I think both are good options, but I'll definitely be impressed if it can perform better than the Foxes. I was super amazed at how well these could soak up the big heavy hits, the jumps, even just the smaller washboardy stuff. All the things you hate when you're just cruising out through the desert, it kind of takes them in stride, and it did make for a really comfortable and controllable ride in the vehicle. So we'll see. Icon has a great reputation, and obviously I run their suspension on my own vehicle, so I do like Icon's equipment. But with the Raptor, it'll be interesting to see where that goes, and I think it'll probably still be a very, very capable truck. It'll just be a matter of picking out, the little details of what's good or what's bad or what's different. So you guys can keep an eye out for that. We'll probably be making that happen fairly soon. We're going to try and do an install and review, same as we did with the Foxes, so we can cover all of our bases and really know the kit as good as possible. But that'll be the next big thing that we do. On top of that, we may add a few other little things. There's some LED bulb upgrades we wanted to do in this truck as well. Even though it's got the HID headlights, obviously things like the tail lights and reverse lights and stuff are still halogen, and so there's some little detail stuff in there that we may want to update to really just get this build put together exactly the way we want it and get it dialed in. But we are happy with where it's at, and so we'll continue to push through that and keep working on it. So, taking a peek at the notes then. Nick, do you want to go ahead and run any questions by me from guys on Instagram? I know there was a few people asking stuff earlier, but I think I've covered most of what I want to talk about here.
Is the AC working fine? I've read forums and problems experiencing myself.
Yeah, that's a good question. So, yeah, so people are asking about the air conditioning. We did actually have an issue with that. So when we bought the truck, it was a 70,000 mile Raptor we bought that was pretty well taken care of and mostly a street queen. But with a little bit more mileage on it, we did run into some problems. And one of those was about 2 months after we purchased it, we had an issue with one of the lines cracking and bleeding out all the coolant. And so we lost our air conditioning for a bit. It wasn't too crazy a fix. We ended up just taking it into Ford and having them work with it. Seems like the compressor and stuff was still fine, so it was mostly just a matter of replacing the lines, cleaning the system, and then recharging it again, which isn't great. I mean, that's still kind of an expensive job, and it's annoying to have to look out for that sort of stuff. But as you said, I know there's been some other guys who have had air conditioning issues. I think it's one of those things that comes with the Raptor and higher mileage, unfortunately. But it wasn't too wild of a repair, and like I said, in our case, we didn't have to replace the compressor, which is usually one of the most expensive issues because once the compressor kind of grenades itself, it'll spit shrapnel through the rest of the system, and it just creates more and more problems from there. So we were able to avoid that, which is good. But yeah, right now it's working great.
Bump stop kit. Are we going to be adding one to this?
Ooh, that's a good question. Bump stop kit I think would be awesome, especially because we are trying to drive this truck aggressively and we have managed to get in the air a couple times. As far as will we be adding one, that depends on what I can do with our budget and what we can get from the higher ups and what they'll allow us to put on. But I do think it would be an excellent modification, and it's something I'd like to push for. And I would certainly like to test one because I've never really had a chance to compare a Raptor with or without a bump stop kit to be able to say how much improvement that really offers. So definitely a mod that is something we'll look into, but I can't say 100% for sure that we will do it or will not.
What's the exhaust setup on the Raptor? Someone wants
Good question. The exhaust setup that we have on here right now is the Corsa Sport system, which is designed specifically for the 6.2 Raptor. And so we ran it. It's basically just a pretty easy bolt-on kit. I mean, I installed it before I tested it, obviously, so I've been really hands-on with this system. But bolts on, no problems. Corsa's fitment is really clean. I would say this system is probably on the quieter side for most people. I personally don't mind it. I think it's really comfortable with the truck. It's a little bit louder than what you get from factory. And obviously this is a catback, and it's actually it's a resonator back. So you keep the factory resonator, your headers and stuff are the same. It keeps it a little bit more mellowed out. You don't get a lot of drone in the cab. There's not any raspiness. It's just a little bit throatier tone. And so side exit looks really clean. It's all stainless. It'll hold up to bad weather conditions. I'd say it's an excellent kit. I would recommend it to anybody looking for an exhaust on their Raptor. The only thing I would say is if you do want a louder version of that or you want more sound out of it, I'd probably go for Corsa's Resonator Delete just to open it up a little bit more and get that extra tone. I've heard good things from guys who have ran those deletes. I've had a couple customers approach me about that and say that they really, really like it. But for us personally, we left the Resonator on. It's clean, it's easy, sounds fine in the cab, and we've had no issues with it at all.
Best option for leveling a Raptor mid-perch? Different coil springs or something else?
Okay, so best way to level the Raptor is what Nick was saying, whether it be doing the mid-perch or a leveling setup or coilovers. Obviously on this truck we have the Fox 3.0 coilovers, and those do provide a little bit of a level to the vehicle. They're adjustable, so I believe Fox rates them from anywhere from just a factory ride height to about 2 inches above. Ours currently has about 1 inch of lift on it with those coilovers, and we didn't really see a need to lift it any more than that. The stance sits really nice on the vehicle, and the more you crank them up, the more you're going to compromise the ride quality anyways. So where it sits with just 1 inch on there is pretty solid, and I think the Foxes are a great way to get that. Now, as far as doing kind of those perch setups or a spacer, a lot of those are a lot more affordable, obviously, than just doing a full coilover replacement. So I know that that's a lot more approachable for a lot of folks. I personally have only been in one Raptor that had a perch setup in it, and it still felt pretty comfortable. It rode nice off-road, and it got it that leveled stance to bring the nose up. So it really does what it says it does. Now, if your shocks and stuff are blown out, obviously it's not going to do anything to really improve your ride or change any of that. It's just going to get the nose up in the air and maybe clear a little bit more space so you can get a bigger tire. So it really depends on the condition of the equipment you're running under there for what you're going to get in terms of ride, I think. But overall, I thought it was decent. Really, with any sort of leveling setup like that, you're going to get a bit of a stiffer ride. And even with these Foxes, as I said in our review, you know, they're a little bit stiffer than probably a brand new, nice factory Raptor suspension, but I'd say that they're stiff in a good way. Some of the softness, you get rid of some of the soft kind of boat feeling where the truck tends to roll, and so with it being leveled like that, it feels a little bit more planted and controlled.
Joey asked what size tires we're running, and then what size tires we recommend for a Raptor.
Oh, good question. So these are a true 35, and I believe it's a 35, 12, 50, 17. Yeah. 35, 12, 50, 17 is what we got on there. It's Mickey Thompson's Mud Terrain. It's been a really good fit. Like I said, we do have, you know, about 1 inch of extra level in the front to get a little bit more clearance with that. And then we have these 1552 Turbo Mac wheels, which also kind of offset the wheel out slightly. With that being said, the fitment's been really clean on a setup like this. I would recommend it to most Raptor guys. I think jumping up into a true 35 instead of the like 34.8, I think is the factory tire, gets you that little bit of extra rubber on there, but also just kind of beefs up the truck that tiny bit more and really fills out the wheel wells a little better. And also the more tire you have, obviously the more you can kind of air it down, get more traction. You have more tread on the ground. It's just going to be a bigger advantage off-road. So I think doing a straight 35 like this, 35, 12, 50, is going to be a really solid setup for a lot of guys, and it doesn't require a ton of modification to make it work. Now, with that being said, we did actually consider doing 37s on this originally, and I think the 37s look amazing on these. And I've seen a lot of guys who've done awesome builds where it's 37s on 17s or 18s, and it really looks just super aggressive on the truck. But with that being said, the 37s are a lot harder to fit without having rubbing issues. And so a lot of times you either have to try and find a way to get more lift underneath the truck, or you're going to be modifying and cutting inside the fenders and trimming things up to try and get that additional space. And you're also going to be a lot more touchy then with what your wheel offset is, because as you change the offset or move the tires outward, you're going to have bigger issues with where those tires catch within the fenders. So for us, the 37s looked like it was going to be a little bit more hassle than we wanted. We wanted something that was going to be a clean setup that anybody could do and or anybody with a Raptor obviously could do, that wasn't going to require us to cut out the fenders or make huge modifications to the truck outside of just the regular suspension stuff we were already planning on doing. So the 35 made a lot more sense, and honestly, I think capability-wise, the 35 is going to get anybody where they need to go with a truck like this.
2 more questions.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any concerns with the brackets holding the tent to the rack braking when you're off-road?
Good question. I think I kind of addressed that earlier in the stream, but I don't personally worry about it a whole lot. I know with my truck and the FSR tent, I've never had any issues with the brackets breaking. I know some people who have ran CVT tents as well and have had no problems. So the Smitty built is maybe uncharted territory, but so far I have zero concerns about it breaking. It seems like the hardware and the brackets it came with are plenty sturdy. And as I said, we've had a chance to run this out in the woods, Bill camped with it for a couple days, and we didn't have any problems with anything breaking or rattling off there, and it doesn't look like any of it's been strained at all to where anything's warping. So far so good. We can kind of let you guys know updated once we have a chance to spend more time with the tent and we do a real review on it, how that held up. But I wouldn't be too worried about the brackets breaking. I'd say if you're running a tent, check them every month or every time you go off-road, make sure they're tight. But other than that, you're going to be just fine.
Last question then, are we running an extra battery?
Also a good question. I know that's a big thing with Overland builds is doing the dual battery setup. In this truck, we are not. And part of that is, we've got a lot of LED lighting on there, but we don't have a lot of other accessories pulling on the battery, so to speak. And we typically aren't running all of our LEDs at once. It's a really excessive setup on this build because we kind of wanted to try a little bit of everything. But with that being said, didn't feel a need to do a dual battery setup on this truck, at least not yet. If we continue to kind of build it further and further into an Overland style build and we want to capitalize on maybe adding things like a fridge or an onboard compressor or some monitoring systems, then I think a dual battery setup would go really well with that and could potentially alleviate other issues down the road and give us a more efficient camping setup. But at the moment, I don't think it's something we're too worried about, and we've been just fine with the battery that's in there, just regular single setup. Cool. So that's it for questions. As usual, guys, thank you for tuning in, and we're happy to sit here and kind of talk four-wheel drives. So like I said earlier in the stream, we will have another live stream coming up probably in a few weeks with Bill back at the helm with me. We're going to be talking suspension comparisons for F-150 stuff, coilovers, leveling kits, lift kits, what we like, what we don't like. So if you're interested or you had questions on that, definitely make sure to tune in for that live stream, and we'll be sending out stuff via email. If you're subscribed to our newsletter, we'll also have stuff on social letting you guys know when that's going to happen, when it'll come out. And then, of course, if you guys like the sort of content or you're interested in our other videos, definitely make sure you subscribe so you don't miss when we're cranking out all of our other installs and reviews and off-road days and things like that, where we're just generally having a good time and playing with trucks. But yeah, thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.